As soon as tonight, the House is expected to vote on a bill that would claw back about $9 billion in previously approved funding. It comes over the Senate as the Senate passed those spending cuts overnight, I should say, which needs to be signed by the president by tomorrow night for the proposed cuts to go into effect. The cuts, known as rescissions, passed the Senate mostly on party lines, with Republican Senators Murkowski of Alaska and Collins of Maine signing with the Democrats. The bill claws back $8 billion in previously approved funds for foreign assistance programs and $1.1 billion for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which funds NPR and PBS. All of this is part of the president's effort to slash government spending, though it falls well short of the DOJ Commission's initial goal of cutting $2 trillion from the federal budget. In retaliation for these cuts, Democrats are now threatening to complicate the normal government funding process, which could lead to a government shutdown later this summer. Joining me now is Katherine Maher. She is the CEO of NPR. Katherine, thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start by playing an exchange for you from the White House press secretary today during her press briefing. Take a listen.
I want to give you a chance to respond to the CEO of NPR. She's claiming that the cuts to their network will, quote, be a real risk to public safety of the country. Murkowski has argued that public broadcasting stations save lives. Could you respond to these concerns?
The NPR CEO said cutting NPR will be a risk to public safety. I am not sure how NPR helps the public safety of our country, but I do know that NPR, unfortunately, has become really just a propaganda voice for the left.
So here's your opportunity. How does NPR, how would cutting it be a risk to public safety?
So the most important thing for everyone watching to know is that these cuts are not about NPR. They are about the National Public Radio Network. 70% of all of the funds that are at risk right now go directly to local stations. Last night, while the Senate was on the floor debating this exact package, we saw a 7.3 register earthquake hit off the coast of Alaska. 3 stations immediately went into broadcast around tsunami warnings. The local sirens in their hometown told residents to tune in to their local radio station. Our staff in those, well, excuse me, not our staff, local staff in those stations stayed on the ground at sea level, putting themselves at risk to make sure that their local residents had the information they need. This is just one of the many ways in which public safety broadcasting plays out in the public media system around the nation on a regular basis.
And if you lose that funding, could those stations in Alaska, for instance, could they be at risk of shutting down completely, or how directly could it impact them?
In Alaska, many of the stations receive up to 70% of their funding through federal dollars. Across the country, often tribal areas, rural areas, 50%. These are areas that are exposed to extreme weather patterns, like tornadoes, for example. In Florida, along the hurricane coast, often at risk. We have seen estimates that as many as 80 stations could go dark, and almost all of these are stations that exist in these areas that otherwise have limited resources and limited access.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but let's now address this issue of the perceived bias of NPR. I want to play for you a little bit of a conversation I had with Senator Susan Collins. Take a listen.
I'm very concerned about what the impact will be on the emergency alert system in states like Maine, where the system is dependent on public radio. The problem has been NPR, which its own whistleblower, Yuri Berlin, said was extremely biased and that there was no one in the newsroom who was fair to Republicans, is essentially what he said. Mm-hmm. I agree with that. But we can defund NPR without disrupting the network of state and local public radio and television.
So, to be clear, she voted no against the rescission package. She opposes these cuts, but she is concerned about the perceived bias of your newsroom. What would you tell Senator Collins?
Well, I've had the fortune of thanking Senator Collins for her support and will continue to do so because she recognizes how important these local stations are and how important this funding is. One thing I would note is that NPR's programming makes up, on average, about 25%. That's a quarter of all programming aired by local stations. So really, we're talking about 75% that is reflective of local programming, local needs, and other other national programmers. I would say to Senator Collins that we have heard these concerns. We've heard these concerns from her. We've heard these concerns from other members. And we've certainly been talking to our audiences in more than 246 stations across the country to understand what they need out of public broadcasting. We want to make sure that we're available and relevant to the entire American public, regardless of where you sit and regardless of what your political beliefs are. And we've been taking the steps from an editorial standpoint to better understand what audience needs are and have more voices on air that reflect that.
So do you concede that those changes need to be made?
Well, you know, I came in about a year ago, and it was my view that NPR needed a strategy that was really focused on serving the nation. That is not an issue of partisan bias. That is about making sure that as our country continues to change, we remain relevant for all of the different lifestyles that Americans have across the nation, whether you work as a farmer, whether you work in a city. There are so many different experiences that this country has. We need to reflect all of that.
Okay, let's talk now about the immediate impact of this package and the cuts to public broadcasting. Right now, if you're the general manager of a rural station in Iowa or Idaho, how quickly are you going to have to deal with these cuts, and how quickly could you be forced to make tough decisions?
Stations are already dealing with these cuts. We've seen layoffs of journalists, local journalists. Indiana recently cut all funding, all state funding for their local public radio stations. The entire Indiana State State House News team is now gone. We've seen Florida just cut its state funding, and now Florida stations are making really difficult decisions about what they can sustain. Local journalists are going to be among the first who are at risk. Broadcast coverage will also be at risk. And as I said, we're going to see stations go dark potentially in the next quarter.
What about nationally? Is the NPR newsroom at risk? How soon will you have to make difficult decisions about your staffing at the national level?
It's a great question. I think that we're going to be dealing with those decisions over the course of the next 3 to 6 months.
Okay. And at this point, is there anything else you can do? Is it a situation of where are you concerned that if these cuts go into effect, even if a new administration were to come in down the road or Democrats were to win back the House in the 2026 midterms, will these cuts be difficult to claw back? You can't just restart a station that shuts down.
You can't just restart a station that shuts down. Once you start punching holes in the national network that serves all Americans and has done so for 50 years, you will start to see that those will not be able to come back. This is infrastructure that exists that serves difficult topographies in the mountains and in the valleys across the nation. It serves large geographies in some of our most rural communities. Those will start to eventually erode, and they may do so sooner than we think. And unfortunately, that will be difficult to recover.
Okay, Katherine Maher, thank you for being here and being so honest with your perspective. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.